So today we are looking at interviewing, right? So we've talked about the cover letters. That is, that's going to get somebody to look at your resume. Then we talked about resumes. The resume is what's going to get you called in for an interview, and the interview is what's going to get you the job. So that is our purpose here, right? We're looking at like how to actually nail an interview and get freaking hired and get, in the world helping people, right? So by sort of our intro here, it's the means by which a candidate procures their job. It's how you're going to actually get it, right? This is you really facilitating information, especially job related information, with your potential employer, right? This is the exchange, right? You are talking with your employer, and you're figuring out like what you need to do in order to be like a good employee within this job. And they're gauging your answers to determine if you're going to be a good fit and if they want to work with you, right? So this is going to provide your employer with like an ability to assess not only like who you are as a person, but like your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities, right? So like your knowledge is sort of the heady stuff. A lot of you guys are going to walk in with plenty of knowledge, more so than most personal trainers that are out there. Skills as well. Abilities is something that you develop over time. I think abilities is what you kind of get through like experience. And I think skills and abilities, sometimes, you think of those as being like the same thing. And maybe they really are, but in my head, there's sort of a distinction, right? Like skills are sort of your ability to do things, and then abilities are your abilities to like is your skills and how you're able to transfer them between specific sets of activities. So like a skill is sort of the stuff that you are generally imparted with, and your ability is specific stuff. Like me, I think that like when I first started, training people, it's like I knew how to do like a barbell squat. I knew how to like, demo a barbell squat, but an ability that I lacked until I worked with lots of clients and had tried a bunch of different sentences and a bunch of different things was the ability to impart that information in someone else. I used to say something like, well, you're going to put it on your back and you're going to squat down. Doesn't really help somebody figure out how to do it properly, right? That's not very specific. I'm not really imparting information. So eventually it was like, I want you to imagine you're, screwing your heels in to the floor, and that creates a little external rotation in the femur. And that like explanation that way is what really imparted that information to my client. And so, your employers, when you're interviewing, that's something that you will kind of want to show off to them, because they are looking to, evaluate these things. When I ask, when I'm interviewing people, a lot of times, like when I would interview instructors for Sochi, for instance, one of the questions that I would always ask them, which was really important to me, is like, if I'm hiring another teacher, I want to hire a teacher who knows how to address all of our students. We've got different strokes, different folks, like I say that all the time, but like everybody learns in a slightly different way. And so I would often, ask the question like, what are you going to do to address the needs of like different types of students? How are you going to address students who have like a lack of time to go to school? How are you going to address people who maybe don't have like a formal education? How are you going to address people who do have like a super formal education, but maybe are not that very physical? What are you going to do, like auditory learners, visual learners, physical learners? Like, how are you going to address like these different ways that people learn? And I would always pay really close attention to their answers. And, what I'm looking for in an instructor, at least, is somebody who, would say, well, I'm going to address my, we're going to address physical learners, this way, and auditory learners this way, and visual learners this way. And then like, it involves like, that's what a lecture is, laying out information, 2 or 3 times in different ways, different examples, rewording things slightly. That's, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed, and hopefully you don't like, I'm not like pulling, the shades open and revealing something that's going to make listening to my lectures boring for you anymore. But you might notice that I'm pretty circular about how I say things. There's a lot of times where I'll say the same information 2 or 3 times in a row. And that's me trying to rework that sentence a couple different directions so that maybe someone who doesn't understand one version will understand the second. And sometimes it drives people crazy. I have had students be like, "Yeah, we get it. You can move on." But that's something that's like important to me. I want to make sure that everybody's being addressed differently. So when I'm interviewing, that's something I look for, and maybe that's what a potential employer is looking for you as well. And so I always tell people, like, when you're going in for interviews, don't be afraid to be a little circular about how you explain things. It's okay to impart that information, once or twice, or maybe even up to 3 times, if you're sort of relaying the same information, but in a different way. Employers can appreciate this because they're like, oh, what a well thought out response to an answer. You don't say the exact same thing, but you say the same thing in a different way. And so, like, saying in a different way, that allows, that's communicating that you are a communicator, if that makes sense. You're communicating that you know how to impart knowledge, which is a big part of what personal trainers do. And Irene, this is what we were kind of talking about. Irene and Robert, we were just talking about this the other day when we met for our assessments, right? And everybody, both of you guys got way more comfortable with it as we kind of got further along. And Robert, you were really nailing it towards the end. It was like you kind of figured out your sentences almost, because eventually you figure out like what these key sentences are that work, that get somebody to snap into it. So when we were doing our assessments, right, you want to tell your client the what. So you're explaining like what the assessment that you're doing is. Like, we're going to do the overhead squat. It's an assessment that's going to tell me a little bit about your overactive, underactive muscles. You tell them the why, right? And you're going to break down, like, we're doing this so that I can figure out how your body moves and what exercises I need to give you. And then you tell them the how, which is like, you're going to squat down and you demo it without giving them too much of a demo. And that's great, because then, like, and you practice it, and eventually you figure out like what stuff gets somebody to snap into a place. This is why so many trainers, I guarantee all 3 of you have heard this, right? You squat down as if you're sitting into a chair. Every trainer says that. That's like, I want you to imagine you're sitting back into a chair, right? That's like such a common classic. Or I want you to squat down, your knees should be right over your toes. You hear people say it all the time. Your knees shouldn't go past your toes. That's not even necessarily true, but it is a really good note to make someone stick their butt out, and sticking your butt out activates your glutes. So it's a really simple sentence that a lot of us can say, without having to go into the nitty gritty of like actual kinesiology. Be like, well, some people have a longer femur, and so maybe sometimes it is okay and appropriate for your knee to go past your toe. That could actually lead to a proper. No, you got 20 people, you got 10 seconds to explain something so that they're all keep their calorie burn high. Squat, stick your butt out, don't let your knees go past your toes. That sentence is quick, easy, and it hits most people effectively, So that's like an ability, right? That's like something that you develop over time. So the more you can kind of communicate that information in an interview, the interviewer is going to be like, this person knows this person's been talking for a while. They get it, right? So you want to kind of develop your confidence. That's going to come through, practice and experience. But you want to use your interview. You want to use it. Remember, and always keep this in your brain. I don't remember if it says this later on in the interview, but I'm going to say this up front so you guys remember it for the rest of this entire lecture. A lot of times people get really nervous in interviews because it kind of feels like you're being grilled for information. It's almost like you're being interrogated. You got to remember, the person across the table from you, the interviewer, they want this interviewing process to be over. Interviewing sucks. Hiring is the worst, guys. Like, because number one, it's a lot more work on top of your plate. It's something else. Like, you don't always have to do interviews. You're doing your normal job. Then one of your employees leaves and you're like, crap, and you got to like spend extra time trying to find somebody to fill that slot. And since that slot isn't full, everybody else is doing overtime trying to make up for the lack of this person. The interviewer wants this they want to hire you desperately. They're like, I want you to be the one so that I can be done with this process and get back to my normal job. Please be a good candidate so I can hire you. It's not an interrogation. It is just making sure that you are the person they want to fill this slot. So the cards are stacked in your favor. They're not stacked against you. And sometimes that's hard to remember because it does feel like you're being, you're under the bright light. Like, where were you on the 9th and 15th? There's no good cop, bad cop. There's only the good cop. So candidates should be using the interview to get a realistic overview of your job duties, your responsibilities, and your issues. If anybody is interrogating, it's you. You're the one trying to figure out like what the actual job is and whether or not you want to work there. So that's your interview. That's sort of a brief overview. Now, resume writing, obviously a big deal here. You want to make sure that you bring your resume again to your interview. They will certainly have a copy, but always bring it with you. It shows that like, you are over prepared, and it's always better to be over prepared, But the most effective resumes clearly focus on one specific job title. We were talking about this, right? Yesterday. This is where in a lot of our example copies, we put the title, personal trainer, group exercise instructor, general manager. Like on my resume, I have it listed as, program director. That was me, kind of moving out of the regular training realm into sort of corporate world, right? So that's your title is right at the top there. Let's see the other versions we got. Did we put it in this one? Yeah. Here's our second one we built yesterday. Charlie, Irene, you guys actually haven't seen this one. We built another resume as we went last night in case you guys want to have a different format. So this is a separate format. This is actually a Google Docs version of a resume. But again, personal trainer is the title there. I could say, nutritionist if I wanted to. Maybe I was getting a job. Spell nutritionist properly is going to be important. Maybe I decided to go with the job at, where would I work? GNC. Good God, I just had a stroke. Does anybody smell burnt toast? Nutritionist, right? Maybe I'm trying to get a job somewhere like that. So it depends on like what I'm searching for. I could say like wellness expert. That's not an official title, so I'd probably stay away from that one. But something like that, right? And this is a very different version of our resume that we built. The one that we built in the morning, did we have title on that one? No, we didn't. We didn't do a title on that one. So generally, sometimes you'll put a title, sometimes you won't. Lots of different versions out there, but generally the best resumes, they are focused on one thing specifically. So putting that like you want to be a personal trainer in your title, go for it. It's great. It just shows like a little bit of professionalism, and it shows that you are targeting for this thing. One thing that we're going to talk about later when we get into the working for yourself side of things, if you're going to open a business, are you going to be a business that does a lot of stuff okay, or are you going to be a business that does a few things amazingly? Are you going to be the jack of all trades, master of none, or are you going to be like the master of something specific, right? I think there's room in the world for both, but generally developing a niche, being good at something specifically is what will often set you apart. That is something that, like I'm telling you guys, the corrective exercise certification, the CES, is probably the most valuable thing that you're going to get at Sochi. I may be a little biased here, but like I'll tell you, like when I went into school before I even got my CES, I remember like working with my boss and being like, "Hey, I'm in school learning about the body a lot. We're focusing on a lot of like corrective exercise and stuff." I don't know if I probably said corrective exercise at the time, but I was like, if you get any injured clients, like send them to me. Those are the clients I want to work with. And so like by saying that, it was great. Like my schedule filled up really quickly because my boss was like, "Oh, you're old and you have knee problems? Oh," and then Brad popped into his head. It was like, "Oh, you got back problems? Those are injuries. Oh, you got diabetes? You've got this, you've got that." That made my boss think of me. And then, there was a guy that I worked with, Antoine, who was a monster because he was like an ex-NFL player. Anytime somebody was like an athlete, they weren't thinking about me, which is fine. I can train an athlete as well, but like they thought of Antoine, like he was a professional athlete at one point. So by having like those, having like a niche and having something that you're kind of specifically focused on is great. That's something that sort of helps you. And so if you can highlight those niches, on your resume, and then you can talk about them during your interview, that can give you a leg up. And it gives you something, you're taking a little bit of control of that interview, and you know what you get to talk about. You know, what are you best at? What's something that you can highlight and talk on all the time when it comes to an interview, you know? When it comes to me, like during interviews, I try as often as possible to communicate the fact that like I am a good communicator. Like, you know, I'll even, you know, joke around about it during my interview. Because sometimes you'll get into an interview and people will go, "How you feeling?" I'm like, "I'm feeling great." Like, it's like, "Wow, it's great to meet you." You know, this and that, blah 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 blah. And I'm just trying to like be as convenient and disarming as possible. I try to be really personable. One of my favorite go-to answers. We're going to talk about this, but with those classic questions that they ask you in an interview, right? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Right? People love to ask that question. You should avoid trying to get too personal during an interview. Like objectively, that's something I'm supposed to say. Don't get too personal, but man, do I love to give this one silly answer as a joke and use it to disarm the interviewer. Then I'll give them my real answer. But I'll always go say, well, I don't know, hopefully married. Just as like a joke about like being a single guy. And that always like throws an interviewer off and they're like, what? And they think it's kind of a funny answer. And that's a great, and I'll go, no. In all seriousness, like, you know, generally I want to work my way into like a managerial role. And that answer, people love that answer because they're like, oh, okay, this person's looking for longevity. But that's something I do. I don't think you necessarily have to do that. But if you can find something that is humorous and disarming and kind of an unexpected curveball answer, you know, that, again, that puts the ball in your court, you know? I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, though. So let's get back to the resume part here. Again, state a very clear objective. List your education, list your relevant experience. References are separate. This used to be something that would be put on resumes. Robert, we were talking about dead space yesterday. Maybe you can fill that with references, although I don't recommend it. Generally, references are something that go on a reference sheet, which is just a separate document that is super simple, where you list like somebody that you know, what your relationship with them is, and your contact info. Oh, and what their role is. Who they are, what they do, how you know them, and their contact info. Generally 3. I mean, sometimes you'll see 4 references, but 3 to 4 is pretty standard. Don't use your family, and then always avoid like spelling and grammatical errors, which obviously I think that goes without saying. I think that goes, especially after how much time we spent like, you know, just with formatting yesterday. Now preparing for the interview. So when you're getting ready to like go out for a job interview, the training industry is no different. I know the training industry feels different. You know, we've got the benefit of working in this industry where we get, you know, the part of our job is that we get to wear shorts to work every day. You know, like, and comfortable shoes. Other people, they got to wear slacks. Screw that noise, you know. Collared shirts. What are you kidding me? It's, you know, our industry, it's fantastic. We get to work where we get to wear shorts and athletic shoes, and we get to be comfy. We get to work outdoors a lot of times, like all this fun stuff. Just because all of that is true does not mean you don't need to dress up for your interview. You know, it is still a very professional, very formal situation. And this is sometimes hard to convey because we're also on the West Coast. And the West Coast is even more relaxed. I love talking to people from the East Coast. Everything back there is super formal. Like, people will wear full-on suits to interviews as a personal trainer, and that will not be looked at twice. That is a normal situation. Out here, we're lucky enough, you know, business casual, you know, slacks, nice shoes, button-down shirt. But that's going to be really important. You know what kind of setting you're going into. You know what your organization you're heading to is. Research your agency ahead of time. Do your research. It's important to determine like the tasks that are going to be really important before the interview is going to happen. So before you get to your interview, you should absolutely know where you're going to park, how much time it's going to take you to drive there, what door you're going to go into, where you're going to meet the interviewer, like on the floor. Are you going to be at the front desk? You're going to be at the sales area? All of those things, you want to know that ahead of time. And so when you get that initial phone call with your interviewer, ask those questions, be like, what time do you want to meet? Where should I park? If you haven't been to the location before, where am I going to meet you in the gym? Get all that descriptive stuff. To be fair, a good interviewer should be sending you all that information anyways. But if you can be proactive and ask about it ahead of time, it's awesome. I love stuff like that. I love when somebody is like proactive and asks me specific questions. I helped my friend move this weekend. What a freaking nightmare. I mean, I love him. I love him to death. He's a good friend. But like, he just was not ready. He had like professional movers coming and packing everything. And he was like, so they're going to be here and packing. And like, you're going to help me like load my car and stuff. And I used to move professionally. So he was like, if you can just supervise them. And I was like, all right, well, what stuff is going in your car and what stuff's going with them? He's like, well, some of the stuff over there is going in my car. I was like, no. I was like, I don't want the word some. I want you to tell me what's going. And I was like, Andrew, eyes on me, buddy. We're going drawer by drawer. Like, I need you to pull this stuff out. And what's in this drawer? What stuff is garbage? What's going with them? What's going with us? Like, nothing's going with us. Great. What if it is garbage? He's like, oh, this is garbage. Great. Next drawer. And by the end of the day, he was getting super annoyed with me, but I was like, you have to answer these questions, Specific is important. Otherwise, those movers, they're going to pack everything. And at some point, you're going to be like, oh, I forgot to pull this thing out. So get all that information out ahead of time. It's an important part of like what it is. What's your travel? What's your lodging arrangements? If you happen to be going to a city that you're not out of, and then what hour are you going to be there? Most of the time, your agency is going to take care of all this. Like the organization that's hiring you, like I said, they should be bringing all of this information up. But in case they don't, ask those questions and prepare ahead of time. So research the organization before you interview. That's going to lead to you having a little bit of knowledge that you can then sort of shade your answers towards, when you're bringing stuff up. Like when I went in for my initial interview at Biggest Loser, I knew a little bit about like what the show was, and I wasn't a fan. I don't like the show, even to this day. I don't care for it. And so when I was like going in for the interview, I was like, if they ask me to be like a yelly, screamy trainer, that's just not who I am. So when they asked me inevitably, because this is a question that you'll almost always get in every personal training interview. They'll ask you a little bit like, well, what's your training style? What's your personality like? And I remember I had an answer to that loaded up in my, in the back of my brain, ready to go. And I was like, well, I mean, if you're looking for the type of trainer who's like a tough love, screamer, yeller, that's definitely like not my style. Like I'm a big fan of like positive reinforcement, and I don't dislike negative reinforcement, but I don't believe in punishment as a method for training. And like, I was like super firm about it. And I remember actually having a conversation. I brought this conversation up yesterday when I was talking about the career objective. And I told you guys how, I had a manager who was like telling me how, he was like, you didn't have a career objective on your resume. And I was like, no. And I was like, it takes up dead space. And he's like, that's my favorite part of a resume. And during that same conversation, when we talked about my resume, and he convinced me to put that on there, he was like, you were a weird hire. He's like, you made us as interviewers not uncomfortable, but like you flipped your interview around and it felt like you were grilling us. And I was like, that sounds like me. This is a conversation we had like years. No, not years. Probably 2 years. After my interview, after I had been hired. But he was like, yeah, you were a weird hire. Because it felt, you weren't cocky, you weren't abrasive, but you had a very clear vision of like, what you wanted to do as a trainer. And that made us almost a little bit nervous because we weren't sure that you were going to be moldable, to be a good fit at our agency. So I would say, like, don't go too far, but have your answers loaded up. Like, I knew a little bit about the company, so I wanted to say certain things about like what I wanted out of the job and like what my style was. So, it sounds, this is almost like the reverse of what you should do. I almost catered myself away from what they were looking for. But the thing is, I lucked out. The Biggest Loser Resort, very different than the show. And so it turns out they didn't want someone who is a punisher. They didn't want somebody who is a screamer. And so I was in the end, I was a good fit, which is lucky. So, know what your agency is, know what it is they're looking for, so you can kind of bring that up. If you're working on for a place that is like really heavy on sales, talk about that during your interview. Be like, yeah, I like the idea. Like Equinox. I remember when I got hired at Equinox, I only worked at Equinox for like a week. I don't even, I don't know, not even, I mean, I think I like a paycheck for like under $100 because it was like less than, it was only training hours. Because I just immediately was like, well, this was a mistake. I don't like working here. But at one point during the interview, they'll ask you, it's like, hey, are you comfortable asking, our training sessions are expensive. Are you comfortable? Do you think you're comfortable like selling that? And I was like, oh yeah, I mean, I believe that I'm worth, more than what you're charging because I'm a really good trainer. And that's the answer they're looking for. And I knew that was the answer they were looking for because I knew, Equinox is all about confidence. And so I went in there and, I was like, what's the strongest, most confident answer I can have to a question like that? But so that's the kind of thing you want to figure out. Like, researching your agency can help you answer questions like that. But before you get there, like I said, know a little bit about the people who are hiring you as well. I'm not saying you have to do, I'm not saying you have to get on Facebook, but you sure could easily. Let's see how quickly we can do this. I'm gonna go to Indeed here. Let's see how fast we can learn something about like a job that's hiring. Personal training. Here's that virtual one we looked at yesterday, right? So it was virtual personal training in Los Angeles. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste and go to their website. Let's go to maybe their Yelp. Let's check out their website here. Let's check out their Facebook page. All right, here's their Facebook is probably a great place for us to learn some stuff. I'll log in a minute here. Master trainers. Let's check out some of their posts. Let's see if we can find a trainer name. At a photography. Okay, that's not exactly, not now. Looking for some hashtags with names. True form running. So I'm already learning a little bit, right? Like true form running treadmills, for instance. I could do a little research on those and figure out what that is. This is the same guy in every one. If I can find this guy's name, which is really what I'm looking for here. Whoop. Hey, guess how long it took Kenny Cherison and I to put something together? Who the heck is Kenny Cherison? Yoink, copy, and paste. Oh, look who it is. The account is private. All right, smart man. Apparently he's a big fan of RuPaul's Drag Race. Some guy. So we can learn a little bit about like, these people. If I were to do like there's a lot about RuPaul's Drag Race. We could do a little bit, we could really do some research here, figure out a little bit about these people. Maybe we find out, and I'm saying this is real deep here, but maybe we find out a little bit about like, or is this person like a dog lover? That's something you can bring up during your interview. Don't go crazy with it, but on the flip side of all of this, did we see how easy it was to like find someone's name? Remember, your name is out there as well. And that's one of the reasons why I like social media. When you're job hunting, like make your accounts private or do a little bit of scrubbing. Like your info can be found. It's not that hard to learn, a lot about someone. So know what your commute is, know a little bit about the parking situation, everywhere you're going to meet your candidate. I will sometimes, one last thing on researching an agency. This is also something that I have done in the past. You can always borrow a friend's phone or, dial, what is it, *64 or something like that. Dial whatever to make your number private and then call a gym and be like, hey, I was thinking about signing up for a membership there. Can you tell me a little bit about the gym? And learn a little bit about that gym going in. Like, what does the sales team have to say about it? And that's stuff that you can reflect in your interview. How you guys feel about all this so far that we're talking about? Does it feel like you're a spy?
No, there's some great tips. And for me, because I don't do any social media, I'm a bit overwhelmed with how much can be discovered. I mean, I'm aware of it, but it's just like into like the more in details. It's a lot.
I hear that. I definitely hear that. Yeah. I mean, like, you know, if you ever just Google your name. This is also one of the reasons why I've got like my 3 names up there, but Brad Lee Thompson. Amazon. Oh, there's an author, The New Manager's Handbook. Yeah, that's not written by me. Oh, take a look right there. Literally, that's my picture. That is my well fit. Is that the shirt I'm wearing? No, that's the shirt I wore yesterday. That's literally the same t-shirt I was wearing yesterday. But like, that's how easy it is to freaking find stuff online, you know?
Yeah. And I love your tip about the, you know, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? The icebreaker. That's great.
Yeah. That's my favorite place to throw an icebreaker, and you can throw it in anywhere. But I think like stuff like that is helpful. It's just disarming. It makes you personable. Makes somebody want to be around you, you know. And you got to remember the other thing that these people are considering, aside from you being a good employee, is like, do I want to work with this person 40 hours a week? You know. So, Robert, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's cool to be a stalker sometimes, you know.
Yeah, right. So one of the other things you need to do before going to an interview is you should also do a self-assessment. Ask yourself some questions about yourself. It's essential for you to take a realistic assessment in terms of your skills, your ability, your knowledge, your experience, your strengths, and of course your weaknesses, because people love to ask that stupid interview question. What are your greatest strengths? What are your greatest weaknesses, right? That's a classic interview question. And you do not want to go in there with that interview, you know, what's your weakness? By being like, oh, I'm too punctual. I'm too hardworking. Those are crap answers. Don't do the humble brag. You know, I think sometimes one of my weaknesses that I will often bring up, and it's similar to the humble brag. You know, there's nothing wrong with like trying to shade it in as positive a light as possible, but it is realistic. I will tell people it's like sometimes I struggle with time management. I get really wrapped up in conversations with people. I think it's pretty clear that I like to talk, and so sometimes like, you know, I have a really hard time struggling like at the very end of my session, wrapping it up and getting the next one started. Because sometimes I will start to over describe something, or I'll get really wrapped up in an explanation. And so like that's a weakness of mine. That's a real weakness of mine. But what it does is it kind of highlights the fact that it still shows that I'm like, the reason that's a weakness is because I like to talk to my clients. I'm dedicated to my clients. And sometimes it's a fault, you know? Or sometimes I'll be honest with them and I'll say, you know, sometimes I struggle with the concept of like, you know, in the past when I was new to the industry, one of my biggest weaknesses was struggling to charge my clients when they didn't show up on time. But that's something that I've like overcome over the years. You know, it's something that I've sort of learned to get better at because my time is valuable and I can't help people if I'm not training them. And if I'm not training them, then I'm wasting my time. And so like I don't charge them to punish them, but I charge them because like my time is, you know, meant to be used. And so like if that happens over and over and over again, I will eventually drop that client. I'll move them to another trainer. I don't really have a lot of patience for clients that cancel on me frequently. And so you know, sometimes like I will convey that as like a weakness because sometimes it comes off as harsh. And I've had people accuse me of being like, you're so harsh. I'm like, I don't think I am. I don't think I'm harsh at all. I think that I'm very realistic and you have every opportunity to show up. I had a very similar conversation. I very similar conversation with this at my ultimate game on Saturday when I was like, you guys got to start showing up on time because I sat around for 30 minutes today waiting for people to play today. And they're like, oh, you're so hard, you're so mean about it. I'm like, I'm not mean about it. Realistic. Like I could be at home doing dishes, reading, playing video games doing nothing. But instead, I came here and did nothing. And that's not my fault. It's everyone else's fault. So, those are, highlighting your strengths, highlighting your weaknesses. These are real questions they're going to ask you. So you should always do a self-assessment. So you know how to answer those questions. And then preparing for an interview, before you go in for your interview, always, always, always practice with your family and friends. If you don't do that, I'll say I have not done a ton of this. I've done it a little bit here and there. I had my roommates stand around where I lectured, because the Sochi interview is a little bit different. Sochi interview, they do the interview and you have to do like a 30-minute like demo lecture. By the way, I had to speak on the scapula for 30 minutes, which is, it was hard at the time, especially when I didn't have a lot of lecture experience. So I definitely like practiced on my roommates. But I will be, that's actually the only time I've really done this, but it is always sound advice. Even if you're not practicing with someone, practice in front of a mirror. That is something I definitely have done. I used to practice in the car. When I know I'm amping up for an interview, I will, be in the car and I'll often like monologue through it in my head or in the shower. When does anybody else do this? I definitely do this, where you win arguments in the shower. I do that all the time. Where I'm like, I replay an argument that I have with someone recently, and I'm like, when they said this, I should have said this, and when they said that, I should have said this, and I would have counted with this, and then I would have led this, and then that would have let me say this. I'll do that during you get that alone time. Walk through that stuff. Rehearse your answers to stuff. Practice anticipating some of the questions, and then one of the best things you can do when talking to a person is learn how to fine-tune your body language. This is something that is so much more important than people give it credit for, but eye contact is such a big deal, and the right type of eye contact. Look, when you are making eye contact with someone, at their eyes or at their nose. Don't be afraid to like break it, to like move up and like think for a second and come back down. But like when you come back, you're snapping to that person, like you're excited to like, oh, and there's this, right? You're like coming back to them. That's the right type of body language that you want to make. You do kind of want to avoid, you can actually sort of reverse body language it in a really negative way. Like if you stare at the top of someone's head, there's something unique about that that actually makes people uncomfortable, especially if you never break eye contact with it. And that can be sort of a negative eye contact situation. You'll hear people say that, and that's actually, in my opinion, bad advice. They'll say, just stare at their forehead. And it's like, ugh. Because when people do that, they will like stare because they're just trying, they're like, I'm not good at body language naturally, so I'm going to stare and definitely not break. And what it does, it makes people like uncomfortable. So don't be afraid to break eye contact, but you are having a conversation with this person. None of this is closed off. This is, conveying that looking down and things like this is conveying that you don't want to have a conversation with that person or that you are uncomfortable. Hands in your pockets, that's not a good one. Hands behind your back, that's not a good one. Practice, guys, just resting your hands or talking with your hands. That's actually why I talk with my hands a lot, because I don't know what to do with my hands. And so by using them to like point and show me it was this long, I caught a fish this big, using that kind of stuff is actually what helps me have proper body language, that I'm more open to people, because I wasn't good at it for a long time and it took a lot of practice. Luckily for us, I mean, like I said, once you get your first job, you're going to be training people. I'm telling you, the more people you train, the more natural it will be. You can only have bad body language for so long with your clients, because you have to do so much physical demoing. It just gets your hands out of your pockets. It gets your hands out of your armpits or whatever it is you're doing. So eventually bad body language disappears almost on its own. But it's still something that I struggle with, I think about when I go on a date with someone, like when I'm out, dating, I'm like, I practice all this interview stuff. I'm like, I gotta be personal. I gotta, make sure I'm sending the right type of body language. Unless I don't want it to go well. If I think it's a dud, then I'm like, all right, well, now I'm gonna do bad, but no, I don't. All right. So pivoting, Are you guys pretty good? Like, those are some of our general tips and tricks. Do you guys have any questions on any of that stuff before we move into sort of like how to dress and what to wear? Anything like that? All right. So the more practical side of things, sort of the more tangible part of an interview, and this is important, is what to wear during your interview. Men, that's going to be, now you're seeing here, it says like a full-on suit. This is a very, very, very conservative look. This would probably be a little more appropriate on, like I said, on the East Coast. I think going into a full-on suit situation is almost a little bit of overkill, especially if you do not have a suit that fits. Like if you're walking in with like a suited situation, like if you haven't gotten like if it's not like a sharp enough suit that like it doesn't like there's something about suits that are not like properly fitted that look overly, like they almost look overly formal, where it's like it's almost like dress up, and it's like it doesn't feel like it's a natural outfit. That's going to be even more uncomfortable. So instead, and this is special, like I said, because you're on the West Coast, business casual is what you're going to go for in an interview. However, that business casual is mandatory. Dress shoes, dress socks, make sure they match in color. I'm like shouting back, hopefully through time, and hopefully my 18-year-old self will hear me say that, and then better life decisions will ripple forward through time. Match those freaking socks. No white socks. No ankle socks with freaking dress shoes. Slacks, or at least or suit pants. Suit pants are okay, like if you're gonna go with the suit pants, but generally slacks are a really good one. And a matching belt with your shoes. Don't do that brown belt, black shoes nonsense. A button-down shirt, like I said, business casual. Tie is optional. I like ties. I think ties actually look great, especially like if you are going with like just a simple business casual situation. I think a button-down shirt is a great tip to wear with like a really sharp tie. Make sure your hair is, neat. Your face is shaved. Not necessarily if you're rocking a beard, that's totally okay. Just make sure that it's trimmed up. You should avoid too much cologne. Guys, don't walk in there smelling like Dracar Noir. It's too much. It's too freaking much. Or what's that Abercrombie nonsense? When you walk into a mall and you're like, there's an Abercrombie somewhere a mile away. None of that. Cinnabon and Abercrombie. We don't want too much cologne. That's a big deal. And try to wear like solid colors. Striped shirt, plaid shirt. Plaid shirt can be okay here and there if it's like a really simple plaid, but don't go crazy on that. So when it comes to an interview, business casual outfit. So I want to show you what we're talking about here. Sometimes people will go with the polo shirt. I don't dislike that. That still falls under the category of business casual. Me personally, I actually really hate polo shirts, but that's just totally a me thing. I've actually never owned a polo shirt in my whole life unless it was given to me from like a job. But this is not casual. No, but like these are really good examples. You can do like a blazer on top of like slacks. That can work really well. My favorite example that I'm looking at right here, it's probably just, this is a very much a model shot, but this is actually a great outfit to wear to an interview, although I'd button that top button there. I wouldn't do the double button. But all the way up to the top. I'd probably slap a tie on this as well. Business casual outfit for interviewing. See a couple other examples. This isn't bad. Slacks, button down, belt, right? Yeah, there we go. I also love this. I love the simple like black with a black tie, white shirt, black tie. Love it. It's a great look. Right there. Awesome. Perfect. Really simple tie there. One of my favorite. Yeah. Oh, you know what? Also, that's a really good one. If you guys can rock the tie clip, love tie clips. It's like the only piece of jewelry I think I'll ever wear. It's a freaking tie clip. I don't know what it is, but I actually am a big fan of those. So that is that is like a business casual look for men. For women, and Irene, you're only our only lady on the call, but this is something that I've studied up on so that I actually do know how to talk about this now. First time I taught this class, I didn't know what to say. I practiced the hell out of it every time after that. So, ladies, what to wear. This is saying, again, solid conservative dress or suit. You do not have to wear a suit, although women can get away with it a lot easier than men can here on the West Coast. Again, I know it's kind of interesting. Like, the West Coast is a little more liberal with its clothing. It's a little less conservative. So you will see, like I said, business casual almost works better than a suit. But for ladies, though, like suits work really, really well. However, again, that's you don't have to do that. A nice blouse with like a skirt or pants works really, really well. When it comes to shoes, you want to go with medium or flats. And if you do this, if you are rocking the skirt, make sure you're going like at least to knee length, and then generally with like neutral covered like hosiery underneath that, or like super dark, rather than like skin toned, or like especially definitely rather than like white. Belt is like optional. What's the belt rule? Optional with a skirt, but mostly mandatory. So yeah, I'm trying to remember like my lady outfits because I'm not how I dress. When it comes to like skirts, it can work really well, but you want to avoid those super, I don't know what they're called, but the super like wide belts, like giant belts, that are like fashionable. Not during an interview. Like that's definitely not the situation we're going for here. But with pants, they work really, really well. And again, you're going to follow that same rule. Match it to the shoes, right? Simple colors are big. Generally, with like women's blouses, you get like a lot of like colors and patterns. You want to go with like a solid color, usually dark, and a little more conservative there. Simple jewelry, simple makeup, and avoid, again, too much perfume. We don't want too much of that. So we see women, business casual outfit. This is great. This is a good look of like rocking like a blazer with like suit pants. That's like another suit. Those jeans, no, that's not bad. But again, you're gonna see every one of these is really good. But generally, this is a really good like business casual outfit in like our realm. Again, personal training is more casual, guys. Like I totally get it. But an interview is your chance to show that like you understand this. Again, it's just like a resume, right? We all understand this social like unwritten rule in like the social world of like what an interview is and how we're supposed to like approach it. A resume, 1 page, right? No, there's that rule isn't really like it's not like it's not illegal to have a 2-page resume, but you're not going to get hired with it, just because people aren't going to take the time to read it. I also really like this one. What's this one right here? That's a terrific, very professional outfit. But yeah, I'd say that's as close as like women, like when it comes to suits, usually like a suit jacket over like I guess a full on like suit. Like this is almost, I'd say like almost going too far. But them's are rules. It's so funny. I guess we're looking, I think both these pictures actually are from, I was gonna say, I think they look like they're from the same like website. But option 2 in both of these is really, I opened the wrong one. That's not what I wanted. This one. Yeah, sure enough, women's anchor point technologies. Yeah, look at that. Yeah, option 2 in both of these are my favorite options. This one right here I think is perfect, and this one right here. Maybe a less patterned blouse, maybe. So all of those are good options for clothing to wear to an interview. For women, you get a little bit more to play with than men do. Color is like a really cool dynamic tool that you get to use, especially with like jewelry and things like that, but don't use it to like detract away from like, the overall like professionalism that you have. Again, that goes with like makeup and like hair coloring and things like that. We want to be neat. We want to keep our cologne to a minimum, and, convey that attitude. And I'll be honest here, like, women, you guys have a much more of an uphill battle than men do in this industry. Not saying that's right, but I am saying that it's true. You know, I've talked to my female coworkers before, you know, my female like trainer coworkers that I've worked with. And yeah, like the interview process is, I don't know about intentionally harder, but it is definitely like objectively more difficult. You're going to have more questions thrown at you that are things like, what are you going to do, you know, to address like male clients? But, you know, at the same time, like the female trainers that I've like worked with are like all often some of the best trainers in the gym. And like a lot of times they have some of the happiest clients. So, you know, just conveying that you are confident, capable, and things like that, overcome that stupid uphill battle. Any questions on the clothing stuff? Any comments? I know it's like, we're not talking about dumbbells today. It's weird that I am telling people about how to dress, especially because like anybody who knows me, I mean, I could open that closet right now and you guys would see 6 white t-shirts, 6 black t-shirts, 2 or 3 like multicolored baseball shirts, 2 patterned graphic tees, a pair of jeans, and 3 pairs of shoes and 1 pair of dress shoes. So it's weird for me to talk about clothing, but does anybody have any questions about any of this? Cool. Love it. Let's move on. All right. Final preparations when it comes to interviewing. So let's say you've got all this stuff put together. You're getting ready. Interview's coming up tomorrow, right? Again, come with the night before, always put your freaking documents together and know what you're bringing into the gym. If you're going through like a hiring agency, bring your agency information sheet. That's not something that's probably going to happen to anybody in here. But bring your resume, bring your references, bring all of this in a portfolio, right? So, Staples portfolio. Boom. $15, screw that. Doesn't need to be one of those. I mean, you can get one. You can get one of these like leather bound ones and use it for the rest of your career. I mean, you know, it is. It's $15 for the rest of your life to have it, you know? I've got one of these. It's not bad. But right here, 2-pocket, you know, presentation folder, you know, little piece of plastic. I would do one in black or dark gray. I don't know about blue or red here. $3. Go get one of these and bring it with you to an interview every single time and put in it another copy of your resume, maybe multiple copies of your resume, multiple copies of your references sheet. If you did an application online and you have the chance to, print your application. The person who's hiring you should have all of this stuff. But let me tell you, when I had my Sochi interview and actually when I had my I've had this happen twice that I can think of off the top of my head. Who knows if it's happened more than that, but both times I went in with multiple copies of my resume and multiple copies of everything that I needed. And sure enough, like I was interviewing with a guy named Greg at Sochi, but then Jessica, my current boss, sat in on the interview. She like showed up in the middle and I was like, hi, how are you doing? Hey, I got a copy of my resume and my cover letter and my references sheet for you. Boom. And I handed them to her. I had extra copies. I'm sure that reflected positively for me, you know? So that is definitely something you want to do. If you have it all in a portfolio, that shows that you're taking care of these important documents. So if you can print out your application, but do it, but generally you won't be able to. Usually, you know, once you fill out the application, it's going to disappear into the ether. And you know, that a good hiring manager should have printed all those things in case someone does sit on the interview, but maybe they don't. And even if they do, you have them. It shows that you're prepared. Put them, so there we go. Yeah, this is so me. Put them in a portfolio. So that's just shows that you care about it. And then map out your commute before you go there. Make sure you know exactly how to get to where you're going. I think this is a little outdated. It's like, what are you talking about, map it out? I got Google Maps. You know? Yeah, I mean, we all got a freaking GPS on our phone nowadays. But at least make sure that you know, like I said earlier, know what your commute's going to be. Do not make the mistake. You guys know that you can go on Google Maps and like, let's say I'm going to Sochi, right? I'm going to Sochi, right? It should only take me, does it say by bike? What are you doing? What are you doing, Google Maps? By car. Driving. Should take me 9 minutes, right? If I leave now, but let's say I'm going to leave and depart at, 5 p.m. Weird time for an interview, but hey, that is going to take up to 16 minutes. So I need to plan for that. That's rush hour freaking traffic, right? So use this setting. And Wednesdays are apparently better than Thursdays. Thursdays are worse. Saturdays are great. So, use that freaking thing. Figure out what your commute's going to be. Do not make the mistake of showing up late for your interview. That is a huge deal. But at the same time, we'll talk about in a minute here, don't show up a half hour early either. That also gets awkward. All right. Moving on from there, talking a little bit about the different types of interviews, because there are going to be different ways that folks are going to interview you. So there's screening interviews. These are sort of your initial phone calls. I don't really consider this like an interview, but it is something that like you'll experience. I mean, obviously what's going to happen is, your application is going to go in, they're going to review your resume, and they're going to decide to bring you in for an interview. Sometimes you'll just get an email, but generally you'll get a phone call from like your hiring manager who's like, hey, I'm so-and-so. I got your application and I wanted to give you a call today to maybe set up an interview. This initial contact is a chance for you to kind of get screened for a little bit of information before they really decide to like bring you in and, do the very formal traditional stuff. So it's an initial interview in order to determine like who's going to progress to, these later stages, right? It's brief, it's concise, but it is, you talking on the phone with this other person. So make sure, again, you are, what I generally tell people to do is sit down. I know that I tend to be like a pacer. I pace when I'm on the phone. I do like laps around my house like crazy. But that kind of sends like a nervous energy. So sit down, sit upright, try to use body language because that actually will sort of convey over the phone confidence. Get that information out during that interview as confidently and effectively as possible. Occasionally you will have a panel interview. This is pretty rare in our industry, but it does happen sometimes. And this is where you're faced with like a team of interviewers. So the most we usually see in personal training is like the personal training manager, maybe the general manager, and then sometimes they'll bring in other department heads, but super rarely. But when you get that, you're going to get like questions kind of fired at you from a couple different people. All the more reason, again, to bring a portfolio with multiple copies of your resume. But if that happens, you're going to need to be able to think on your feet a little bit, and you're going to get some crap questions. This is this is going to be kind of opinionated, but like when it comes to panel interviews, what's going to happen is you're going to get a couple bad interview questions, like dumb ones. And I think that's just because like generally when you put a group of people in a room together and they are all like leaders, someone, they all have to kind of get a word in. Their role should be just to simply sit there and kind of listen. But what will happen sometimes in a panel interview is it's like, well, John asked a question, I should ask a question. And it's this weird like competitive thing that's happening across the table. So then inevitably you end up like people are reaching for questions and the questions kind of suck. If that happens, you're just going to remain confident and stay on message and continue talking about like what your expertise are, what you're good at. At the end of the day, that's always a good piece of advice when it comes to interviewing in general. Just try to return as often as possible to what your strengths are. And that's why we do that strengths assessment. Know what you're great at. And that is what you're going to continue. That's your message overall. You see that in like political freaking debates, right? It's like a candidate gets asked a question, they're like, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. And then they talk about something else. It's a smart thing to do, you know? It's crappy to see in a debate, but it works really well in an interview because like they're on message. So that'll sometimes happen in panel interviews, which are awkward. One-on-one interviews, but they're also really rare. One-on-one interviews, this is where you are meeting directly with a hiring manager. This is a great way for you to specifically like build rapport with this person that could be your direct manager. So again, you know, they're considering like, do I want to work with this person, you know, 40 hours a week? Is this somebody that I want to like hire and work regularly with? So you can get that kind of answered pretty easily if you are like positive and, you know, you're building rapport with this person. So it's a really good way to kind of work on your conversational flow. The more you do that, the more likely you're going to be, the easier it is for this person to make a, you know, emotional decision. And that's the thing. That's one of the things we gotta remember. A lot of the stuff we're talking about today is very objective, you know. Robert, you asked me earlier, like objectively, do I, you know, how I feel about like, you know, my education, and do I think it's really helped me in a lot of ways? And like, in some of the parts of my career, sure, objectively, you know, I wouldn't have learned that stuff if I hadn't gone to school. But emotionally, sometimes I'm like, you know, it's been, you know, I took a freaking history class that was totally unimportant because it was just me memorizing a bunch of dates that U.S. battles happened. I don't remember any of them. I wish I would have studied why those battles happened, but I had a crappy history teacher. And I needed a history unit. What that has to do with personal training, I'll never know, but it is what it is. And so emotionally, you know, that's how I'm answering. Same thing is true here. When it comes to a one-on-one interview, you can manipulate this in a positive way. They should be objectively asking you questions about what a good trainer you are, you know, because that's what they're there to care about. But at the end of the day, like everyone's human, and so there's a lot of like emotional stuff going on there. If you can be likable, you're gonna get that job, you know. It's like the reverse of The Office, you know. If you guys watch, if anybody watches The Office, Steve Carell is a terrible boss. Like he's just the worst. He's an idiot, but he was an amazing salesman, right? That's the whole point of the show. He's just such a good salesperson that when you look at his numbers, he got promoted. Because objectively, he was a terrific salesperson, even if he was a terrible manager. That will often also happen in the training industry sometimes. That's why so many people have bad management. Is because it's not always about like the person who's actually best for the job, you know. Sometimes it's just a numbers game. Telephone interviews used in situations where like, you know, meeting is impossible. This will happen sometimes, but in today's world, probably a Skype interview, you know, a Zoom interview. You know, these are situations that sometimes occur. Now, when you're doing these tips and tricks, it sounds odd, but if you know you have a phone interview, dress up for it. Put that attire on, groom yourself. All of that is going to give you this back of your brain importance that means that you are going to, and you will perform better in the interview, you know? It's, what did my friend say the other day? I'm going to steal a line from my friend Evan. It's, what is it? Mike's secret stuff or Mike's special stuff from Space Jam. Where, you know, they're losing, and then I think Bugs Bunny fills up like a jar of like just tap water and labels it Mike's secret stuff. And all of a sudden everybody drinks it, and then they all think that that's going to make them play better, and then they go out and they play better. That's dress up for your phone interview, you know, sit upright, you know, posture up, use your body language. It sounds weird, but it really does make a difference. And then also, and this is actually measurably important, minimize your distractions. Get into an empty room, you know, don't have the TV on in the background, put your pets in the bathroom, you know, get those distractions out of there. If you got kids, you know, go to a place in your house where they're not going to distract you in the middle of your interview. You know, focus on this interview. It's only going to be a few minutes, you know. But that nonverbal communication still comes through on the phone. You can hear it, you know. It's like when you talk to your parents and they're like, "Do you have a rough day?" You're like, "What? I'm on the phone. How did you know that?" They know. They can hear it. Mom powers. Well, interviewers have interview powers. So telephone interviews, it really is important. You'll hear these nonverbal cues without realizing it. So dress up, stand still, sit upright, sit still. Use notes. This is helpful. Actually, what's kind of nice about it, like phone interviews, is you can maybe take notes on stuff that they are saying, and then you can parrot that back to them, repeat it back to them. Watch your ums. That's a hard one. That's super hard when you're just like learning how to talk. I struggle with my ums, but that's also why I do that. I will draw out a signal something if I know I'm gonna and then like I said, like minimize the distractions. That's really the biggest one. All right, so those are your different types of interviews that you will often see. Sometimes you will see actually one more, group interviews. These suck. Equinox does these, unfortunately. They're the classic example that I think of when I think of group interviews. They'll pull multiple trainers into a room simultaneously, and they'll kind of ask like sort of rapid fire questions. They'll be like, "Here's a question," and then they'll move around each person, and then that will move you on to the next round of interviews. I'm really not a big fan of that format, but I get it. They're trying to really, get a wide volume, and then that also allows them to schedule interviews at one specific time. It's definitely a lot easier for the interviewer, but it makes it harder on you, who is the interviewee. If you do end up in a group interview situation, you don't worry so much about trying to set yourself apart. That will happen naturally. Try to set yourself apart on your resume. Try to set yourself apart in your cover letter. Once that happens, then you can refer to that information on your resume and on your cover letter, rather than worrying about like, what's this person going to say? Crap, they said something that's somewhat similar to me. How do I say something else? Don't worry about that. Just worry about conveying the same information and highlighting what's important that you've already laid out on your cover letter and resume. That'll keep you on task. That'll make you seem more confident than anybody else in the room without having to actually, manufacture that confidence. So that's a really good, that's a tip for like, if you end up in a group interview situation. The only place I know group interviews like regularly is Equinox. They really do kind of like to do that. So general considerations, arrive 5 to 10 minutes early, not 30 minutes. 15 minutes is also okay, but like 30 minutes early, too early. If you get there 30 minutes early, great, sit in your car, wait. But never, ever, 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 ever show up late for your freaking interview. Every single time we have one thing that you guys have not seen, and normally we do this around every 3 months. Usually every 3 months or so, we have a guest speaker come to Sochi from Crunch or Equinox or 24 Hour. We have all these like relationships. They all come at different times, and they give you guys. We bring the whole PFT program together, capstone and core, and they tell everybody about what they are looking for as a hiring manager in employees. And every single one of them says it every time. Crunch, it's funny, the guy from Crunch always says he puts a lot of emphasis on this, but inevitably they'll do, "You guys have any questions?" And then everybody sits there quietly and nervously. So then I'll chime in. I'll be like, "So what's the number one tip? If you had to boil everything down and you had to give everybody in here one tip for getting hired during their interview, what is that one tip you would give?" And he's every time, this guy, and every one of them says it, but this one guy in particular says, "Show up on time." They don't even say show up early, but they say show up on time. And guys, like our career services department is sending students out on interviews all the time. And then, career services follows up with these people and they're like, "Hey, how'd the interview go?" And every so often, and the PFT, I will say, PFT department, we're the best at it. So, bragging, our department actually crushes it. We don't get as many late arrivals as some of the other departments do, but I hear it every time from Miriam. she complains about students not showing up for their freaking interviews on time. How? It's on your phone. You can GPS it. So just show up on time. I really just, I think I've been talking about this for 3 minutes now. I think it's enough. Hopefully, I conveyed it and put enough importance on it. But I really do mean it. It sounds so simple, but it is the first impression. Wait patiently where they tell you to. This is actually why you don't show up too early. If you show up 30 minutes early, I'll tell you, as an interviewer, it drives me crazy. I get it and I appreciate it. And I know that I should be like, wow, what a responsible person. They showed up 30 minutes early. I know that that is how I'm supposed to feel. But every time it happens, I'm like, it's so early and I got to finish my class. I'll get a text message from the front desk and they're like, hey, your 2 o'clock interview is here. And I'm like, really? Because it's 1:30 and I just finished my lecture and I've got students hanging out after class and they all have questions about their homework or about how to do an exercise. And I always have this 30-minute window to like meet with people after class so I can meet their needs. And now I feel like I can't do that. And I feel like I'm failing my students and I got to go give this interview and I'm going to punch them. That's me being emotional. That is not me being objective and a good interviewer, but that is how in my heart, that is how I feel. So arrive early, don't arrive too early. That's my pro tip. So wait patiently, maintain eye contact. Firm handshake's always nice. I don't think that I'm too strict on this personally as somebody who's done interviews, but I definitely consider it, I think it's just been said so much in the world that like when I get a limp handshake, I'm like, limp handshake. I know I shouldn't care, but I for some reason, like, just so many people say it. I don't care when you ask me. But my first instinct is like, it crosses my mind. So have a firm handshake, make eye contact, make some small talk. It's nothing wrong with like, talking about like, wow, this is a lovely building. What a cool gym. I love the flow of the atmosphere. This seems like a fun environment to work in. It's okay to say stuff like that. Get the conversation going. Again, you're trying to build rapport, right? But you're going to maintain professionalism throughout the entire interview. That's going to be huge. At the end of the day, this is a very formal situation, So that is the end of our notes. We're going to go through a couple interview questions here. We'll talk a little bit about like some examples. So you want to be prepared for, this kind of wide variety of questions, right? This is stuff that, again, you're trying to anticipate. Nobody's going to be able to anticipate it perfectly. You're never going to know what questions they ask you. But again, if you have like a niche and that's something that you've really focused on, you guys have one coming out of school, nutrition and corrective exercise, right? Those are both extra niches, or niches, if you want to say it that way. And so like, understand that like you can figure out how to get back to that message as often as possible. It's going to help you during your interviews. So personal questions, like things like, why do you want this job? Come up with an answer to that question. Think about like what your why is. Why did you get into personal training? Not because, hopefully not just because, well, it pays better than waiting tables. It's not a bad answer. I mean, like it's a very real answer, but like it's not a very strong reason, or tell me about yourself, right? Talk about like what led you to the realm of personal training. What are your hobbies? What are your interests? I love that question. I love to ask people that, because I'm interested in it. It's a good icebreaker. So if you get a question like that, and talk about it. Me, I always talk about, my ultimate Frisbee game on the weekends, right? I love to address, I love to like jokingly address, it's like, oh yeah, well, I love cardio. I'm like a big runner, and I go, clearly, I love that bit. What are your short-term and long-term goals? This one's super fun, right? Short-term goals, obviously, is to like build a client base. Your long-term goals, work your way into a place where, you've got lots of clients established, and you can figure out a way to like help multiple, a larger group of people. So we got a lot of like personal questions. What are your greatest strengths? What are your greatest weaknesses? You should do a self-assessment. You should know answers to that. These two right here, these are two of the most classic freaking interview questions you are going to get. So do that self-assessment. I think that these questions have been used so many times that I think it's actually easy for people to manufacture false answers to them. So I don't like asking those interview questions, but people love them. So they are kind of insightful. You will get philosophical questions occasionally in an interview. These are kind of funny, but like philosophically, they'll ask you maybe what your training style is. Usually, though, they are related to like moral questions to make sure that your philosophy matches that of the industry. Crunch, for instance, right? If I go to Crunch Gym, you'll see that they'll have it somewhere right on the front. Boom, there it is. Hashtag no judgments, right? That's Crunch's like big thing. They're all about this like no judgment situation, which means, oh, and they actually have a link to it. What that means, some say it's a tagline, but for us, it's a way of life. Our Monday through Friday mantra, an unfiltered philosophy that drives us to create a community and a gym for all, right? They are all about like, regardless of your shape, size, age, race, gender, or fitness level, everybody, should work out. I think that's great. I think that's really cool. If you're going into a place like Crunch, they're definitely 100% going to ask you philosophically what, they'll say, well, we believe in this no judgments. How do you feel about that? What does that philosophy mean to you if you hear it? So there's a philosophical, they'll sometimes ask you questions that, they're trying to get you to match your, philosophy on exercise or recreation, youth sports, things like this. Sometimes you'll also get, what's your philosophy? Generally, this is like an HR thing. This is where you usually have to go through like once you get hired, but sometimes you'll get it in an interview where they're like, well, if you saw somebody, take a pen from the vending machine, is that stealing? And it's like, yeah, I know that, yeah, and I know I'm supposed to say yes to this answer. So just be aware for those, be prepared for those. It is only one single bag of potato chips, but the act is stealing. So sometimes you'll get that weird philosophical question in an interview. Knowledge-based and experience questions, you get a lot of these. So these questions are going to ask you about like, what do you do if your client this? What do you do if your client that? Or how do you address the needs of this population? So they are like knowledge about a specific issue. Sometimes you'll get a case study. Usually that's a second interview thing in training, but occasionally you'll get like case study questions. So they'll say like, your client has hypertension, how would you address that? So you'd say, oh, well, if I've got a client with high blood pressure, we'd focus a lot on cardiovascular exercise because that's going to help strengthen, their vascular system. I'm going to avoid moving their head too much because that'll create blood pressure changes. I'm gonna make sure they're always breathing correctly. I will say, here's a trap though. Here is a trap. This is a real story. And I remember I told the student that I would always use this as an example. And I would tell this story over and over again for the rest of whenever I teach this class. I've been waiting to get to this moment all day because this story sucks. So one of our students, Jake, who is doing quite well for himself now, but he tried to start out at Equinox. He graduated and went straight to Equinox to go get a job. And he had a group interview. And one of the things that this interviewer did during that group interview is they decided to do like a knowledge-based portion, right? They asked him, specifically, they were like, all right, guys, you're going to get paired up, which super weird thing to do during an interview, but they got paired up, 2 trainers at a time, and they had to build a program, and it was for someone with hypertension. And at least I think that's how it went. But anyway, inevitably what happened at some point is the training manager said some comment of, hey, I really liked how, your person, they were this old, they wanted to, flatten their stomach and they wanted to lose weight and they had hypertension. I really liked how you had all these ab exercises on there. Planks are a great way to like tone the stomach. And Jake was like, isn't it not a great idea to do like isometrics with like a client who has hypertension because that could raise their blood pressure? Which I want to say right now is true, and Jake nailed it. But he was in an interview with a Michael Scott. He was in an interview with a Steve Carell, who got promoted and obviously forgot that it was important to avoid raising the blood pressure of someone who has hypertension, and was like, no, planks are a great exercise. And it reflected really poorly on him because this person interviewing him was dumb. So knowledge-based experience questions. I don't want you guys to worry about stuff like that. You should answer with the correct knowledge and with the correct experience. But that is something that can sometimes backfire, I guess. That's a real thing that happened to one of our students, and I think it's so silly. So they might ask you questions. How would you develop a program? How would you do this? How would you operate, under this experience? And then sometimes you'll get situational questions. Sometimes these are, like I said, sometimes the philosophical version of you saw a coworker steal a bag of potato chips. What do you do? I'd be like, I'd tell them not to do that and report them to my superior because I know that's the answer you want me to say. Those are situational questions. The most common situational one they'll ask you, I think that every manager is a little worried about this, is your client shows up late. What do you do? You'll get that one a lot. And the answer, or a good answer to that question, in my opinion, is, first, obviously try to get in contact with that client. And then if they can, if they don't show up for their session at all and they decide to cancel, I will try to reschedule and get them on the books, but I am still going to charge them for that missing session. And that's the answer they're really looking for, because it does hurt the gym's bottom line when you don't charge your clients. And it's hard. I will say, I personally have like a 3-strike policy, but that's not what they want to hear in an interview. I was pretty lenient. My advice to you guys, do not have a 3-strike policy. If your client doesn't show up, they sign a contract, they don't give you 24 hours notice, they get charged for their session. I was a little more lenient than I would give you advice to be. I would say don't be like me. But that was how I approached it. And in your interview, say, I'm going to charge them. That's a classic situational question you'll get. And there we go. There's the stealing supplies from the storeroom. What do you do? Report to a manager. And then you'll get think on your feet question. These are the weird ones. These I hate these questions, actually. And you guys know me. I like to goof around. I like to be humorous. But a lot of these are like weird, humorous, or at least attempting to be humorous. Like, all right, I want you to answer this question. Why do you think a duck is better than a walrus? I don't know. Stuff like that. I hate these. If you were a cartoon character, who would you be? Compare yourself to a thumbtack. If you're an animal, what's your spirit animal and why? I hate these. I like being goofy. I really do. But like this, to me, I don't think they're, I get that they're just trying to get you to try. It's an off-speed pitch to see like the real version of you. But if you do get questions like this, just answer as honestly as possible and laugh about it. Every time I've got questions like this, I'll be like, wow, weird question. And then, start talking. If you could have one office spot, if you could have dinner with one person, who would it be? That one I like. I actually like that one. Compare yourself to the chair you're sitting in. I hate stuff like that. But you'll get it. You'll get those sometimes. They're weird and awkward, and you're just going to have to stumble through them. Closing questions. These are like, this is really cool. This is a cool section. Usually it's like, do you have the classic closing is like, all right, well, in summary, why do you think you're a good candidate for this position? And what you want to do is revisit right back to the philosophical part. Tie your philosophy to why you believe you're going to be a good trainer at that gym. That's what I like closing questions when you look at the flow of an interview. And this is great, by the way. I know we haven't been on, you guys have been on interviews, I'm sure, before. But like when you zoom out and you kind of reevaluate, you track, you're like, oh, the interview is kind of like an arc. It starts with like a lot of intro BS, and then it gets into the real stuff, and then it closes with like a lot of outro BS. So the strongest part of your interview is always the top. It's always that middle part of the arch. So if you're having trouble with any part of your interview, revisit that part that you're great at. Like, go back to it. So why should you hire you? And so you revisit the same thing. You're like, well, like I said, you know, I always take my job very seriously. I'm punctual. Professionalism is really important to me. And, you know, I think you should hire me because I am dedicated to helping as many people as possible. And that means that, like, I'm going to bring in as many people as I can, which is great for revenue and great for making a difference. That's what you want to have in a gym. You want to hire me because I'm going to use your gym. I'm going to use it a lot so I can help as many people as possible, because that's what's important to me. Super strong, super confident answer. It's on the border of cocky, which is like right where I like to be. So that's your closing questions. And then last little bit, I think sometimes this is the most important part of the interview. Questions for the interviewer. So this is where you flip it. Again, we're on the border of cocky. Do not pass up the opportunity to ask questions to your interviewer, but avoid the actual cocky. So when do I start? Oh, don't do it. Don't ask what your salary is going to be. That's another one. So don't ask when do I start. If you say like, you know, if I get the position, you know, what is my starting date? That is okay. That's totally different than closing with like, I know I nailed it, so when do I get the job? They're different. They sound similar, but you know. So don't pass up this interview, this opportunity. But don't ask questions about what the salary is on the first interview. That is a second or, you know, even third interview situation. But like say like, well, this is great. You know, what are the typical hours? You know, what does training look like for the first couple of weeks? You know, what is it like? And this is actually an okay pay question. You can ask this when it comes to salary, because it shows insight, but it's not asking about salary needs. And be like, hey, are there any incentives for trainers with like further certifications? That's a great question. That is great, especially because it shows that like you're interested in having more certifications. You're interested in being more qualified. So we love stuff like that. And then my all-time favorite interview question. I love it when people ask it to me, and I love to ask my interviewers it. What does progression within the company look like? You know, how does climbing a corporate ladder within this organization, what does that look like? Love it when people ask me that question, because that conveys to me that someone is looking to advance their career and they're looking to stay long term. And remember, I said this at the beginning, the interviewer wants the interview process to be over, and they never want to do interviews ever again because interviewing sucks. It means more work. So they want to hire someone who's going to be here for a long time. So when you ask a question like, what does it look like if I've been here for 1 year, 2 year, 3, what incentives are there for me to climb a corporate ladder? How do I work my way into management? Oh, love it. Those are great questions. Ask those. You know, are there opportunities for professional development? Great. What is the starting date for the position? Great. Love stuff like that. There are some illegal questions. You shouldn't ask these, and if you get asked these, you do not have to answer them. Questions about your age, race, religion, ethnicity, citizenship, marital status, family status, health, disabilities, you know, criminal records, sexual preferences, any of that crap, don't answer those. They're not even allowed to ask those questions. If they ask questions like that, it's against the law, and you don't have to answer them. So just be like, you know what? I'd rather just not answer that. It sucks because if they put you in that position, I mean, and they won't. I've never been asked literally any of those questions in an interview personally. But if you get stuff like that, just avoid them. The only time I've ever experienced, anything like that is just like, you know, in regular like workplace stuff. You'll get like, you know, where somebody like strays into the realm of like politics and stuff. And you're like, I don't need to answer any of this. You just kind of play it close to the chest, button up. That's me, the most unbuttoned person ever. Uh, so, yeah, refuse to answer the question and move on. Now, last little bit here. After the interview is over, do your follow-ups. Do your follow-up calls, do your follow-up emails, whatever. It's saying here, send a thank you letter. I don't know. I think that's actually a little bit too much. Like, thanks for the interview. It's okay to say thanks, but I would do it from the realm of like following up. Like, hi, this is Brad Thompson. I just want to reach out and say thank you for bringing me into the interview. It's been a few days, and I wanted to like reach out to see like how the interview process is going, and if you wanted me to come in for maybe a second interview. Something like that. Follow-up letters, follow-up calls, stuff like that is great. When you go back for a second interview, which is really awesome, that's going to be, it's narrowed down between you and one or two other applicants. And this is where you can kind of get into the nitty-gritty of like what actually, like, I really like to take the approach during a second interview because generally the decision already really has been made. I like to take the approach of like, oh, I got the job. In my head, that's what I'm thinking. So then I will start to like change some of my wording and stuff and be like, so one, and start speaking in like the forward tense as if, well, when I start working, I'm going to do this. What am I going to do here? Da, da, da. But a lot of times they're going to ask you, if they didn't get some of the interview questions that we saw earlier, maybe they'll show up during that second interview. You can answer them the same way. So always be prepared to ask your interviewer questions. That's a big one. And then regardless of the type of interview, at the end of the day, they're looking at your confidence and your professionalism. That's what they really care about here. Boy, stop it. So any questions on interview stuff? Any questions on any of that? Yeah, what's up?
What's your take like on an actual thank you, like a simple thank you card that you actually send there, not an email?
I don't think it's. Honestly, this PowerPoint, and I have heard it from the Career Services Department as well. They're fans. Me personally, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I've never been much of a card person. Like I know people who just like, if you're like a letter writer, I've just never been a letter writer. So to me, it feels like I'm being almost phony. And so it feels awkward for me. So I've never really done it. But it's in the PowerPoint, it says to do it. I think there's a line in your textbook that actually mentions it, or it could be wrong. Maybe that was the 5th edition. You'll hear people say it's a good idea. So I think objectively, I should say that, yeah, that's a great idea. But my personal emotional answer is it makes me feel a little awkward. So, but if you're comfortable with it, I say go for it. Okay, so today's day 4, which means we normally get homework 2, right? Homework 2, 4, and day 6. We don't really have a homework 2 in this class, so instead, I want you guys to maybe consider start working on your cover letters and resumes. If you have Microsoft Office, I'm going to convert these into actual templates to where all you have to do is just replace this information. I'm gonna, it'll say like your name and stuff like that. Replace like this information here, and I'm just going to turn this into sort of a very simple template, and I'll put like brackets around everything to signify like this is where you'll sort of fill out information, or maybe I'll just like highlight it and stuff. But I'm going to send you guys hard copies in your email, and I'm going to upload these to Canvas. And I'll put like links in the YouTube video like we normally have. But with the YouTube links, you got to make sure you download this file and then start editing it. What you don't want to do is just open it and start editing it online for 2 reasons. Number 1, it might not save your progress. And number 2, other students will be able to see that, and then they can write over it. And if we have everybody like on the Google Drive version simultaneously overwriting that document, and you don't save a copy of it yourself, it's, you know, that you're going to lose all your work. So we're going to have, I'm going to send an email out with the cover letter template and several resume templates. I'll probably put like my personal one in there as well. I'll convert that for you guys today as well. They're not due tomorrow. They're not even due by Monday. They're, you know, we're going to work on these until the end of this class. And sometimes maybe, you know, if people are having a really hard time, maybe even after this class is over. It's not important to me when you get this done in terms of like the short term. It is incredibly important to me that everyone has a good cover letter and resume, because I want you guys to get a freaking solid job. So I'm gonna be on. I'm a little more on your case about this stuff than I am probably about any of our other types of homework. I know not everybody has a computer, like a traditional desktop or a traditional laptop or anything like that. That's why I'm going to be on you about like booking a time at Sochi. And we'll know like what those time slots are on Monday. So be prepared for Monday to talk about that. And, you know that you're going to carve some time out next week to come meet with me. It'll be an all day situation. You know, it'll be from 8:30 in the morning, you know, until 10 p.m. at night. It has to be. I don't care when it happens. I care that you guys have a resume. And if we have extra time, you know, I don't have anything against you guys making two. So that's also okay. I know sometimes like people like to have options. That's about all I got. Do you guys have any questions? Interview, resume, cover letter, stuff like that?
Yeah, I got a couple questions.
Yeah.
On the interview process, is it okay to ask questions on like, not specifically what are the job duties, but like type like how many clients do we typically work with, or what's the, you know what I'm saying? Like along
yes and
that
no.
line?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It kind of depends on what the job is. If you're doing a traditional, like if you're going to 24-hour fitness, I would not ask that question, because they expect you, you know, the answer to the question is as many as possible. You know what I mean? But if you're going into like a group exercise situation where you're not doing sales and, you know, you are not like in charge of the membership thing, you know, like me, like, or let's say you know, like me as a teacher at Sochi, right? That's a question I can ask, like, how many students do we normally have in class? That kind of stuff is okay, because it's not my job to get students to come, you know, I'm not enrolling students. But if I were in like a sales situation where I was the one who is like trying to, you know, bring people in, I would not answer that. I would not ask that question, because the answer to it is, you know, how many, the answer to how many clients, you know, are we expected to have, or how many hours are we expected to work? The answer is always going to be as many as possible. So that depends, Robert. I'd say that's going to depend on what kind of place you're working for. If you're going to an Orange Theory Fitness, great question. How many people am I going to be teaching? You know, great. You're not doing sales. What else?
And then my second one was just for next week when we meet up with you. Are we also doing a cover letter, or are we just doing a resume?
We're going to do both.
Okay.
Yep. That way you guys have like a template for both. The cover letter, obviously, you're going to redo from scrap every time, you know. But the template is what's important. So that way you can just, you know, delete that, refill it with new information. Both of them look pretty. Looks matter in the cover letter and the resume. So we want them to both look professional. All right, guys. Thanksgiving break. It's 2 days, but it's a break. What's that?
We don't have class tomorrow?
We do not. No.
Nope. All right.
Tomorrow or Friday.
Okay.
Yeah. So go get some turkey, carb load, play some football, you know, other American stuff, and I'll see you guys on Monday.
All right. Cool. Happy day.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving, guys.